The greatest massacre in the history of aerial warfare, the Marianas Turkey Shoot, where the new F-6F Hellcat dominated the skies over the Pacific like never before. You might know the broad story, but do you know the details, the forgotten history? Well, in this video, we will dive into the records, test your knowledge, and uncover what you likely never knew about the greatest American aerial victory of World War II. Have you ever held a physical piece of World War II history in your hands? What about one from the Marianas Turkey Shoot? Well, what if I told you you could, with 1945 End of the War from Historic Autographs. End of the War is a collectible card set from the biggest non-sport trading card company that takes you back to one of the most critical moments of the war, the final year. Here, each card has a significant battle, figure, or event that took place in 1945. And in their card packs, you can even get autographs, relics, and DNA hair cards from some of the greatest heroes of the Pacific Theater, including some service members who participated in the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Some of the autographs I'm looking to hopefully get are Chester Nimitz, Curtis LeMay, and Jimmy Doolittle. Hopefully, I can grab them. But even if you aren't a card collector yourself, you can own a piece of history here with 1945. It makes a great gift for any history enthusiast, young or old, and is also a great way to learn about the heroes of our past at the same time. So head on over to the Historic Autographs website at the link below and grab one of their boxes from 1945 End of the War. They were kind enough to sponsor this video, and I would really appreciate it if you guys showed them some love. So use code TJ3 and get 15% off and get the perfect gift for you or anyone else on your list. Thanks again to the Historic Autograph Company, and now enjoy. The first domino of the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and specifically the Marianas Turkey Shoot, begins in late March of 1944. Here, a transport plane carries the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Japanese Fleet, Admiral Manaichi Koga, as well as his briefcase. Inside of this briefcase is a top-secret plan. This document details the Japanese idea of drawing the United States carrier fleet into one decisive battle in the upcoming weeks, where they would throw everything they had at the US Navy, hoping to put them on their heels and gain an upper hand in peace negotiations. This plane and the briefcase would play a crucial role in the Marianas Turkey Shoot. And here, as this plane carries the Japanese leader and classified documents, we arrive at our first question. What was the official name of this top-secret Japanese plan carried by Admiral Koga on this flight? A. The Banzai Plan. B. Operation Divine Wind. C. Z Plan. Or D. The Emperor's Plan. The correct answer would be Z Plan, C. And unfortunately for the Japanese, these transport planes, carrying top personnel as well as the secret documents, would fly into a typhoon over the Pacific Ocean. In this storm, both aircraft in the flight, including Admiral Koga's, would crash. Miraculously, a few of the passengers would survive, including Koga's chief of staff. His briefcase, however, which carried the Z Plan, was lost in the wreckage. Or so they thought. In the coming days, the briefcase would wash up on an island and was recovered by Filipino guerrillas, who forwarded the plans to American intelligence officials and eventually Admiral Chester Nimitz himself. This would set into motion the buildup of a major battle, one that would, for all intended purposes, be the last large-scale aerial battle in the Pacific. For one side, it would go down as a major disaster, the other a monumental victory. In the coming weeks, the United States Navy would prepare for this large-scale battle, keeping their fleet together and preparing for the massive strike. The Japanese, on the other side, were unaware that the Americans were already onto their plan and making preparations. But in many respects, this may not have mattered much anyways. The Japanese were already at a number of disadvantages before Z Plan was ever lost. Their misfortune would begin at the Battle of Midway, and continued with every passing battle.
At Midway, as well as Coral Sea and at Guadalcanal, the Imperial Navy had fought well, but had paid a high cost. At each of these engagements, entire air squadrons were essentially wiped out, and with the Japanese rarely ever bailing out or even attempting to crash land, pilot and crew losses were very high. So, by now, in the summer of 1944, many of the Japanese aircraft were piloted by inexperienced and even undertrained crews. The American air crews, on the other hand, were experiencing the total opposite. Throughout the entire war, the strategy of the U.S. Navy, like the Army Air Corps, was to keep their valued aces and seasoned pilots alive, pulling them from the front lines as soon as their tour was over. This was not only good for morale, as high-scoring aces were rarely lost in combat, but it also allowed them to utilize their talents elsewhere, in the training of new pilots back home. Because of this, the training of American aviators was unmatched. Before they ever flew into combat, they were far more prepared than any of their Japanese adversaries. In addition, the American war machine was now operating at full strength, not only with production numbers, but also with advancements in technology. In the early 1940s, the United States Navy recognized that they may soon be tasked with fighting Japan. And unfortunately, it became all too clear that the F-4F Wildcat was outmatched by the Japanese Zero. So, in the coming years, a new carrier-based fighter was designed to replace the Wildcat, the F-6F Hellcat. In many ways, this new fighter, the Hellcat, was designed specifically to take on the Zero, allowing for superior power, armor, and firepower. The Zero, however, still had the edge in agility and maneuverability. But the Navy's pilots were armed with this knowledge, and were specifically trained to use their own advantages while avoiding the strengths of the Zero. So quickly, the Hellcat became the standard carrier-based fighter in the Pacific, and her pilots were ready to fight. But again, the Japanese knew very little of this, and would pay for it dearly. Blissfully unaware of their enormous weaknesses going into the battle, the Japanese fleet steamed forward in June of 1944. As they pushed into this decisive clash, the Japanese commanders were aware of one shortcoming that they did have: numbers. Approaching the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Imperial Navy had only 9 carriers with roughly 450 planes, while they were aware that the Americans had 15 carriers with about 900. To try and make up for this disadvantage, however, the Japanese had attempted to station a large force of land-based aircraft on the islands nearby, which would also be called in to participate in the battle, hopefully leveling the playing field. This too, however, would not go as planned for the forces of the rising sun. After the Americans executed airstrikes on the Marianas, Japanese commanders knew that this was their chance for the decisive battle. They had expected the U.S. to strike further south and had stationed less planes in the Marianas because of this. But at this point, there was nothing that could be done. The great battle was finally here. The Japanese were still confident, however, expecting that their large numbers of land-based aircraft around Guam and the other Marianas Islands would play a major role in evening the odds. This, like many of their other assumptions, would come back to haunt them. Early in the morning of June 19th, both the American and Japanese fleets were approaching the Marianas and knew that the other was close by. But neither force was able to determine the exact location of their adversary. As soon as the sun broke on the horizon on the 19th, the Japanese set up scout planes in various directions to try and locate the U.S. fleet. These scouts would be A6M Zeros, and each aircraft had bombs armed in case they found the target. At 5:50 a.m., one of these Zeros finally spotted something: the entire American fleet. This Japanese pilot immediately reported their position, giving the commanders the crucial location of the U.S. Navy. And this now brings us to our second question concerning this Zero that spotted the American fleet. Let's see if you know what happened next. What did this Japanese pilot do immediately after reporting the fleet's location? A. Attack the entire U.S. Navy fleet by himself. B. Was quickly shot down by an American fighter. C. Return to base. Or D. Run out of fuel. The correct answer here, if you can believe it, is A. This single Japanese Zero, which sighted Task Force 58 on June 19th, reported the location and then immediately radioed that he was attacking the fleet alone. This sole fighter dove in attempting to strike an American destroyer, but was quickly shot down. As futile as this attack was, it does offer a good insight into the mindset of a Japanese pilot during this time, flying into battle no matter the odds and willing to easily give up his own life. And tragically for the Japanese, he would be just the first of many more to come over the next 36 hours. Shortly after receiving the crucial report, the Japanese ordered a strike on the fleet from their air-based aircraft nearby on Guam. As soon as they began to get in the air, however, from the land airfields, they were picked up on radar by the American carriers. American fighters were quickly sent from the decks to attack as they formed up. Upon arrival, the Japanese were still taking off, and the fighters and bombers were no match for the Hellcats. In addition to already being outmatched and poorly protected, they were at slow speed and low altitude, not even in formation yet. Because of this, the Navy Hellcats shot them down with ease, and at the end of the short one-sided dogfight, the Hellcats had claimed 35 Japanese aircraft, with the loss of just one of their own. Obviously, a loss ratio of 35-1 was unbelievable, already a monumental victory. But little did they know that the fun was just getting started. The F-6F Hellcats were quickly ordered back to the fleet to protect the carriers. And here, the remainder of the fleet's fighters were ordered into the air as well, this time in anticipation of a Japanese strike. Since they had captured the Japanese Z-plan, the U.S. Navy admirals knew what to expect and were setting up their defenses accordingly, preparing for the large Japanese airstrike. And this brings us to our third question. What was the defensive strategy that was employed by the U.S. Navy fighters to effectively defend the U.S. carrier force? A. Squadron scrambles. B. Free hunts. C. Combat air patrols. Or D. Low altitude sweeps. The right option here is C. The combat air patrols would be vital to the success of the U.S. Navy fighters in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The thought process here was that the Navy would send up fighter squadrons, who would then be assigned to patrol specific areas or combat zones. They would then scan this area, where they would hopefully meet the enemy and intercept any hostile aircraft long before they made it to their targets. With many of the Japanese pilots willing to easily fly their aircraft directly into American ships, this was no doubt the right move, as it prevented the Japanese bombers from simply diving into the American vessels with Hellcats in pursuit. With the combat air patrols, they had to instead make it through the entire squadron of Hellcats and then carry on for many more miles to the fleet. Furthermore, it minimized the risk of friendly fire from the American ships. For after the Japanese planes, if any did, make it through the fighter patrols, they would then have to brave the anti-aircraft guns of the American carriers and their escorts. But also, if the American fighters were defending closer to the fleet, it could be difficult for anti-aircraft crews to distinguish between friend and foe in the heat of battle. So the strategy of combat air patrols allowed the American fleet and their fighters the best overall defensive system. Flying with this strategy, the first group of F-6F Hellcats would run into a Japanese formation about 70 miles away from the fleet. They would attack and again scored easy victories over the Japanese planes that were en route to strike the carriers. In just a few minutes here, the F-6F Hellcats claimed 25 victories for a loss of only one of their own. Clearly, the Japanese planes were simply no match for the seasoned Navy flyers in their new F-6Fs. The surviving Japanese aircraft continued on, where they were met again by another flight of Hellcats, who continued the massacre, shooting down 16 more. By the end of the 2 intercepts, the first Japanese wave, which had consisted of 68 aircraft, was now down to just 27 as they approached the US naval fleet. Here, their luck would be no better. The Japanese bombers and fighters began to attack the outlying ships of Task Force 58. Many began runs on the US destroyers, and one attacked a battleship, but all would be shot down. In total, 1 bomb would land on the USS South Dakota, causing 50 casualties. In exchange, every Japanese plane in the wave was destroyed. The Marianas turkey shoot had officially begun. Back at the Japanese carriers, things were going no better. American submarines had just spotted their armada and were now launching torpedoes. Incredibly, in this attack, one of the Japanese bombers that had just taken off spotted one of the torpedo trails in the water and actually sacrificed himself for the ship, crashing in front of the torpedo and causing it to explode. Despite these efforts, however, the carnage continued, and multiple Japanese ships were hit by submarines, further limiting their ability to strike the American fleet. But before the damage was done, the Imperial Navy was able to launch their second wave, consisting of 107 more aircraft. Again, the American combat air patrols worked perfectly, intercepting the attacking force approximately 60 miles away from the fleet. In this interception, Navy Hellcats dove in and intercepted, once again dominating the weak Japanese aircraft and pilots. In total, 70 Japanese aircraft were shot down in the initial interception. The remaining 37 aircraft continued on, no doubt demoralized, realizing how grim their odds truly were. So for our fourth question, let's see if you know how bleak their chances truly were. Of the 107 aircraft in the second attacking wave here, how many Japanese planes would make it back to their carriers? A. 5, B. 10, C. 17, or D. 23? The correct answer is B. 10. With the 37 remaining aircraft now at the fleet, they began their dive bombing and torpedo runs on the American carriers. Although most of the aircraft were shot down by anti-aircraft fire, there would be multiple near misses and a handful of casualties on the American ships. But at the end of the strike, anti-aircraft gunners claimed 27 more kills, leaving just 10 Japanese aircraft in the air for the long and lonely flight home. In the second wave, less than 10% of the original force would return home. A couple of hours later, a third wave was sent up by the Japanese. This one consisted of only 47 aircraft, but here the results would be different. American fighters were not fully armed or assembled at this time, so only 7 of the aircraft here were shot down. But for some reason, this wave was mostly called off in its attack, returning to the carriers without attacking the American ships. So 40 of the 47 aircraft returned home unscathed. A fourth and final wave would eventually be launched, but this force would have trouble locating their target. Because of this, they would split up, with some eventually locating the force and others trying to land back at Guam. In their attempts and confusion, 30 of the 49 in this final wave would be shot down, mostly by American fighters. Upon landing back on the American carriers, one of the F-6F pilots proclaimed, "Hell, this is like an old-time turkey shoot." This would be a statement that would create the headlines back home, giving this famous battle its iconic name. And this takes us to our final question. Let's see if you can identify one of the naval aviators in this famous photo. Here we can see a lieutenant in front of his Hellcat holding up 6 fingers, indicating the number of planes that he had just shot down in the most recent mission, grinning ear to ear. So our question is, Who is this famous naval aviator? A. Alexander Varashu, B. Richard Bong, C. Swede Vedasa, or D. Richard Best? The correct answer is A. Alexander Varashu. This naval ace would end the war with 19 kills, scoring a total of 7 in the Battle of Philippine Sea. Many other Hellcat pilots would join him in his celebration, for it had been a monumental victory. For the rest of this evening, the massacre would continue, with more land-based aircraft being shot down on the Marianas Islands. In addition, with Americans launching their counterattack that evening, which was famously successful, much of the remaining carrier-based aircraft were lost, with 3 Japanese carriers that would sink by the end of the day in the airstrikes and submarine hits. In total, in just 2 days, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 350 carrier-based aircraft and 200 land-based aircraft. Many of these were destroyed on the ground or sunk with their carriers, but hundreds were also shot down by naval aviators and anti-aircraft. In exchange, only 1 American ship took substantial damage, and just 23 American aircraft were lost in the first day of the attack during aerial combat. Many more U.S. Navy planes would eventually be lost in the attack the following day, when many of the aviators had to crash land in the ocean. But the total number of aircraft shot down in combat was minuscule compared to the losses of Japan. From this point on, in World War II, the Japanese would never be able to recover the losses of their air groups, with experienced pilots being almost extinct. The aerial war was all but won, and it was, without a doubt, thanks to the Navy Hellcat pilots and their accomplishments in the Marianas Turkey Shoot. So, how many of the questions did you get correct? Comment down below and let me know what I should cover next. Don't forget to check out the Historic Autograph Company and see if you can get an autograph or relic from one of the heroes of World War II, even some of the ones that flew in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.